G'day everyone, it's Joe here again, and in today's session I'm going to talk about gaming with children, or very specifically using games to develop children's morality, to develop their thinking skills around difficult situations in later life. Now, I'm a firm believer that role-playing is incredibly educational, and I've used it with children as young as 5 years old. I think any lower than 5 years old and you start to get into language issues, or more specifically issues where the children don't always know the difference between what is story, what is reality, and the emotional impact of stories can be very, very powerful for those children. If you want to know more about those sort of stages of development of understanding reality, then you might want to look at someone like Piaget and their work. But one of the things that I've explicitly used role-playing for, both with my own children, but also in a game which I've been developing called StoryWeaver. I developed it 25 years ago. No surprise where the StoryWeaver company name came from. But what I was doing in this particular game system was creating an environment where children could explore risk, they could explore society, they could explore danger, and they could be faced with quite moral dilemmas. In fact, in the StoryWeaver rule system, at one stage I actually developed an entire world setting specifically to really, put children in situations where they had to make those big moral decisions. And sometimes they'll get them wrong, and that's all part of that learning process. So, when you start thinking about using gaming to promote moral development, you have to ask yourself, what do we mean by moral development? And the model which I like to use for that is Kohlberg's theory. And he basically says that there's a series of hierarchies of morality. Now, I'm not talking ethics or any specific cultural more. So if you're a Catholic or a Christian, you can adopt this methodology. If you are a Hindu or whatever, this is not a religious construct. It's actually a construct about how you think about right and wrong. That'd be a very broad way of putting it. So at the most basic level, you've got this idea of fear of being punished. So your actions are guided by not wanting Dad to give you to spank you because you've done something wrong. And at the highest level, you've got this concept of a universal view. So you are viewing actions as how they have an effect on the overall environment that you are in. Truly universal. And Kohlberg does a great job of describing through those various levels of education, of development. Now, I also want to be very, very clear here. Kohlberg was not describing reality. He was describing a model that is a good way of thinking about the subject of moral development. And that's all it is. It's a model. But for game masters and for people who are interested in running games with children, that's a really useful thing to have. So let's explore this, how it actually works in a very real world context. I was recently at a hospital running games for some children who some of them have had been in car accidents and actually had brain damage. Others of them had been self-harming. Some of them have come from very, shall we say, disadvantaged homes. And some of them were just ill. Now, when you're dealing with lots of children like that, you have to be very sensitive about what you present in the game. But at the same time, you don't want the games to be flat. You want them to be educational, especially as these games are actually being run through the school of the hospital. We call them brain days. They're just fantastic. And in this particular adventure, which I call the Big Cheese, we actually have a situation where the characters of these kids, and these kids range from about the age of 6.5 through to about 9, they thought they knew who had stolen the magic cheese. They thought they knew who the thief was, but they weren't sure. And the game is actually set up like that. And it challenges the children to a moral dilemma. If you think you know who's done a crime, at what point do you say, we can now breach their privacy, grab them, and search them? And it's a very real-world dilemma. But I'm giving this to 6-year-olds. Now, the situation in this particular instance is set up so that the evil villain is sitting at a table at a bar in an inn talking to an NPC. And the heroes can see that he's got this key, which they're pretty sure is his secret way in, and that says how he's been stealing stuff. They can see it around his neck, and they want that key. That's the critical piece of evidence they need to prove their case. So after a lot of debate, the children decide that they're going to jump him. They're actually going to go over the table and pin him to the ground and take the key from him. And I, as the game master, thinking, this is perfect. What we're dealing with there is a very low level on Kohlberg's hierarchy. And what I said to the kids is, if you do this, there's going to be all these people around you who don't know what you're doing, and it's going to look like you're mugging the guy. In other words, what we're looking with Kohlberg's there is you will be punished. There is a threat over this action. It was a very real-world consequence. But you can see, because we're dealing with younger children, this explicit moral dilemma is phrased or is framed at this low level of Kohlberg's. And after a bit more discussion, the kids decided, yes, they were going to do that. So, of course, they jumped the poor guy. Well, actually, it was a rat man, but at the time he didn't look like a rat man. He was actually in a sheep's clothing. It's a very long story. Well, they jump him. And, of course, as soon as they do that, I then say, I go deadly quiet for a moment, and I say, as you do that, everyone in the bar stands up and they're looking at you. Some of them are placing their hands on their swords and their clubs. And you can see these kids' faces just go, oh no. Because what they've realised is they weren't going to get away with it. In other words, the results, the ramifications of their actions, even though they were grounded from what the kids thought were morality, finding out who the thief was, were actually having another negative reaction. So we put them in this moral dilemma, we phrased it in terms of a hierarchy that they could understand, and now it was coming to fruit. Now, the kids in that then started to backpedal, and they were able to explain, they had to explain to the people in the bar what they were trying to do, and they had to call the police in, and then they had to get a warrant and all the rest of it, and actually solve the problem. And eventually they were successful. But here's the thing. Even though it would be very easy to argue that they did the wrong thing. I mean, argue, you don't go and mug someone because you think they're guilty of a crime. Okay, some people do, but that's not a good move. You know, moral development-wise, that's pretty primitive. What they did is they were able to get it wrong in a safe setting and see the ramifications of that. And as a game master, for me, that was absolutely perfect, because what I've done is I've given the kids a lesson, a real hard, real-world lesson, but without them being put in a situation, say a playground, or even worse, a real bar, where there's alcohol involved later when they're teenagers, and they're going to get into some serious, real, violent trouble. So, my tip to you as a game master is, if you're running games with kids, look up Kohlberg, treat his hierarchy as a framework that you can use to think about when planning your adventures, and then apply that. In every game, apply it at least once when you're running with younger players. In fact, I'd argue you could even run it with older players as well. I love nothing better than the old trick of time travel. Do you kill Hitler as a child or not? You've got all those things. But it makes the games interesting. It gives them a really rich nuance and a really rich context. But in the framing of children, you can actually teach them a valuable life lesson in a way which is entertaining, and in a way which will be just as memorable, but a lot less threatening than doing it in real life. I'm Jay Sweeney. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.